The House managers argued that President Trump both incited the riot and refused to stop it, even as he certainly should have known what was going on. They cited both his actions in the days leading up to the riot.
This pro-Trump insurrection did not spring into life out of thin air. We saw how Trump spent months cultivating America's most dangerous extremist groups. We saw how he riled them up with corrosive lies and violent rhetoric, so much so that they were ready and eager for their most dangerous mission, invalidating the will of the people to keep Donald Trump in office.
And his push on January 6th to get Vice President Mike Pence to stop the electoral count.
Mike Pence, I hope you're going to stand up for the good of our Constitution and for the good of our country. And if you're not, I'm going to be very disappointed in you. I will tell you right now.
The managers show Pence being evacuated from the Senate chamber and the mob calling for him to be hanged. So, Julie, we knew about the mob. We knew about the calls to hang Mike Pence. But we learned something new in this trial. We saw just how close that mob came to actually getting him.
Absolutely. I mean, that was one of the things that was so striking about this, is just seeing just how close this was to the vice president, the second in command of this country. To also see, I think, the way that the rioters were very clearly targeting, trying to get after Nancy Pelosi, the Speaker of the House. And also the other thing I thought was so powerful about these videos is really the audio, actually hearing the words of these rioters and seeing just how directly motivated they were by these false attacks on the election. There was a feeling among some of those rioters that they actually were going to be able to go and stop this process. They were actually going to be able to go and stop Joe Biden from being certified as the winner of this election. And that is directly linked to the attacks that Donald Trump was making for weeks and months beyond the rally that he had just hours before the riot. This had been a pretty calculated process for Trump to try to build this kind of fervor among his supporters, and we see where it led.
You know, I had a meeting with Donald Trump a few weeks after the mass shootings in 2019 in El Paso and Dayton, and I brought up to him his rhetoric about journalists. I said I wrote about this in my book. I told him that some crazy person could take his words to heart when he talks about the press as the enemy of the people. That somebody could take his words to heart. And I urged him to change that rhetoric. This was a meeting in the Oval Office, and his answer I thought of as we saw this all unfold, and it really, it was haunting. He told me, "I hope people take my words to heart." And I don't think he meant that he wanted people to literally, go out and act and take out enemies of the people, but it's almost, Rachel Scott, you covered so many of these. You covered the Trump campaign. You were at countless rallies before, Trump rallies during the course of the campaign. I almost get a sense like he never is able to comprehend or deal with the fact that people could act on what he is saying, could take him literally and act on what he's saying.
Yeah, and John, I really do think back to some of those rallies. I was at the rally when President Trump suggested that 4 congresswomen of color should go back to where they came from, and then heard thousands of people inside of that arena chant, "Send her back." They hang on his every word. And when I covered the riots, that deadly insurrection here on January 6th, that's what I thought about. It felt a little bit like a Trump rally, and they were echoing every single claim. They felt like they were there because they were defending the President of the United States. And I also thought that was so compelling in the House impeachment manager's case here, because they were playing back his supporters' words in which they were saying, no, we felt like President Trump wanted us to storm the United States Capitol. They were using his own supporters' words against him in those moments, but still his team firing back today and saying he didn't incite the riot, that those people that broke inside the Capitol right here did it on their own accord, that they did it without former President Donald Trump. But there is no denying just how much of an effect that he has on his supporters. They listen to everything that he says.
But Phil, one argument that the defense team made is that Trump has spoken like this for 5 years. In fact, the managers brought up things that he had said back in the early stages of the campaign, as far back as 2015, and we never saw something like this. So what is different here? Why? Trump has talked about about getting your country back, and they're trying to steal your country. He's talked about voter fraud even before the election actually happened. So what different happened here? Did the managers kind of establish that?
And I think that was the challenge.
Well, Yeah,
ahead,
what the Democratic House managers established was they built this whole foundation that Trump had laid over the course of many months, dating back to the summer of 2020, before the election, that he was predicting there would be widespread election fraud, even though there was no evidence of that. Then he was predicting that the mail-in ballots would be fraudulent, even though there was no evidence of that. And then, of course, after the election, day after day after day, in his public comments and in his tweets on social media, claiming that the election had been stolen, claiming it was rigged, claiming that there was all of this fraud and that he had actually won in a landslide. None of that is true, but it creates the context through which those the rioters, the demonstrators, gathered on January 6th here in Washington. And that's where that anger and that violence and that organized insurrection, that's what it was motivated by. That's the case that the Democratic House managers made.
I mean, in some ways, Julie, it seemed to me that this was a shocking event, of course, January 6th, but it wasn't entirely surprising because Donald Trump had been calling for something like this for a long time. And now, finally, his supporters really took him at his word.
And one of the things that I think was pretty disingenuous in the case that his lawyers were making was this idea that he has been saying some of these things for so long, because actually there's been some concern for quite some time. And you mentioned it, John, in your conversation with him. There has been a lot of concern about what the impact of his rhetoric would be. And just because we hadn't seen something like this before didn't mean that that concern had been alleviated. And so there was almost, even though it was so incredible to watch that riot unfold in real time and really almost unbelievable to see this happen at the U.S. Capitol, there was this sense that something like this was inevitable, that this had been building for so long that we were due to reach a boiling point, which we of course did.